Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. "He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much." Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost."
Well, good morning, everyone. We are in a series of preaching here at King's Community Church called Jesus on the Margins, looking at how Jesus went to those on the very edge of society to draw people in to a relationship with him. So those who were the most rejected, the most afflicted, the most outcast, and in the case of this morning, the most despised in their society, become the most welcomed, the most accepted, and the most drawn in to a relationship with Jesus. So to start, I want you to think for a moment about who the least popular people in our society are. Now, I know that's a bit of a nasty and mean question, so maybe don't think of names or faces or the person next to you, but who are the people in our society who are perhaps the least thought of or perhaps quickly disregarded? A couple of suggestions from me, ranging from the not so serious to the more serious. So firstly, parking enforcement officers. Now, I want to say, if there's anyone here today, or perhaps anyone watching online this morning, who spends their days as a parking enforcement officer, I take my hat off to you. You do a noble task. And I take my hat off to you primarily because I think you know quite how unpopular you are as you go about your job. We all know, don't we, that it is 100% the right thing to do to pay for parking. We know that if we don't pay for parking, we're breaking the rules and we're doing the wrong thing. Nevertheless, if we see someone fixing a parking penalty to our windscreen, we can't help be filled with a deep sense of personal injustice. And we take out our rage, don't we, on that poor person who's just doing their job. They're not very popular people sometimes, are they? Second, over the last year or so, we've seen huge public outcry of resentment towards those in leadership who've acted in a hypocritical way. So through the course of the pandemic, we've seen leaders who've imposed rules and restrictions and guidelines, only then to be caught breaking those restrictions themselves. As people have messed up and they've done the wrong thing, made the wrong decisions, we've seen people become public enemy number 1 overnight, haven't we? As there's huge public outcry, and any sense of popularity or reputation they might previously have had has plummeted through the floor. The character that we see Jesus encountering in the passage we just heard was a hugely unpopular, despised man in his society. The kind of person that no one would have wanted anything to do with. No one would have wanted to have been seen with him. And surely if Jesus was passing through town on his way to Jerusalem, there was no way that he was going to spend any time with Zacchaeus. Perhaps if you're hearing this story for the first time today, or maybe if you've just grown up hearing this story, on first glance, it's a bit of a fun story, isn't it? Of a short little fella who has to climb up a tree to see Jesus. But as with many stories in the Bible, there's more going on underneath the surface, and more, I trust, for God to reveal to us this morning. So a bit of background for how this encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus, how this conversation comes about, and then I just want to draw 2 points from their conversation and see how they apply to us. So a bit of background. Luke 19, verse 1, we heard there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he had become very rich. So at this point in Luke's gospel, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he's passing through this place called Jericho. Now, the whole nation of Israel at this point in history was occupied territory. So it was under the rule and the reign and the authority of the Roman Empire. And one of the ways that the Romans would exercise their authority and their control was to employ local people in these territories on their behalf to collect taxes. And these tax collectors became loathed people, hated people. They were traitors, so they betrayed their own people. They'd sold their soul to the Romans. And not only that, but they were often extortionists too. So by charging more taxes than were actually due, they would then be able to pay the Romans what was due to them, and they would pocket the extra as their own. It's theft, isn't it? And in a culture where people would have lived from hand to mouth, these tax collectors are literally taking the food out of their own people's mouths to line their own pockets. Can you see why someone like this might have been unpopular? It's not like our poor friend, the parking enforcement officer. This is an unpopular, loathed, despised man. And this man, Zacchaeus, not only was he a tax collector, but we read he was the chief tax collector. So in this hierarchy of corrupt, greedy, rich traitors, Zacchaeus was, no pun intended, he was top of the tree, the most greedy, the most corrupt of them all. And we read that through this extortion, unsurprisingly, he's become very rich. He's a wealthy guy. He's not just a slightly unpopular guy. He's loathed for what he's doing. By his own doing, he's an outcast amongst his people. Even criminals would have looked down on this man. That's the weight of dislike there would have been against him. And perhaps that's why we see this man struggling to get through the crowd to see Jesus. Sure, we read that he was a short guy, so we had to climb a tree to see Jesus. But if Zacchaeus was a short but respected, honorable, wealthy man, we'd probably read how the crowd may have parted so as to let Zacchaeus through to the front so he could see Jesus. But given the hostility and the hatred towards him, the crowd block him from getting to Jesus. Do you ever find yourself when you're driving on a dual carriageway and you see the dreaded sign in front of you saying that one of the lanes is about to close and so everyone's got to get over to the left? And what follows that, if I'm driving, not Caroline, my wife, if I'm driving, is a bit of a game of chicken as you see how long can you leave it before I cut in front of someone and make my way towards the front of the queue. And once you've done that, even though you know you yourself have just pushed in the queue, you make sure, don't you, that you drive right up close to the car in front of you so that no one can do what you've just done to them. And you make sure that you don't let anyone in. You can imagine this crowd in Jericho. You can imagine them not leaving any space in between them, blocking Zacchaeus from getting in. As a side note, let's make sure we're a church family who make it easy for people to come and see Jesus. Let's be a crowd that usher people through, even people who might not be like us, even people who society might look down on. Do we get out of the way and usher people in to come and see Jesus when we gather? Let's make room for people to come and see Jesus. But Zacchaeus' only option is to climb a tree and get a glance of Jesus. We can only assume that he'd heard something about Jesus. He'd heard something that had made him curious and that he wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus going by. And so he climbs a tree. He's ready to probably humiliate himself in public, climb up a tree to see Jesus. And it's here in this slightly comedic setup of Zacchaeus up a tree and Jesus walking down below that we see this encounter between them happen, the conversation that follows. And I just want to spend the rest of this time today just drawing out 2 points from their conversation and their encounter and seeing how do they apply to us in our relationship with Jesus. So firstly, Jesus calls us by name. Jesus calls us by name. In verse 5, we read, when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. Now, I want to share a humbling story of when I was at school. So on the first day back after a summer holiday, it had been a great summer. On the first day back, I was lining up with probably hundreds of other students ready to make my way into assembly when, to my amazement, my surprise, and my horror, I heard myself being called out by name. And the quite daunting head teacher, I heard him say 2 words that still send shivers down my spine today. He said the words, Johnston, haircut. And I'm sure you can understand, I don't know what he was talking about, But that was it. I was sent off the school premises. I was told only to return once I was complying with the school's uniform policy and I'd had a haircut. And clearly my delayed sense of rebellion since then has been never to get a haircut ever again. But the power and the authority of being called out by name was striking. Amongst the crowd, he'd singled me out and called me out by name. How did he know who I was? Wow, he knew my name. But actually, whilst that was a fairly humbling experience, I actually learned what a good head teacher he was on our next conversation. So the next time I had an encounter with him, he called me by name again, and he asked me how my exams how I was getting on. He asked me how my brother and sister, who'd previously been at the school, were doing. So not only did he know my name, but he knew about me. He knew my life. There's something very personal, isn't there, about someone knowing your name, calling you out by name. Imagine today if somebody that you only met once or twice were to come up to you after today's meeting and call you out by name and ask you how you were doing. It makes us feel known, doesn't it? It makes us feel seen, as though that person cares. And now imagine somebody that you've never met before were to come up to you and to call you by name. Well, this time you might be slightly taken aback, won't you? You might be slightly freaked out. How does this person know who I am? What do they know about me? But amidst that confusion, there's no doubt you'd want to know more about this person. Well, how do they know who I am? What is it they've heard about me? The truth for us today is that no matter how close to or far from God we feel, God knows us and he calls us out by name. Each one of us individually, he calls us by name. Just as Jesus looked up and he saw Zacchaeus and he called him by name, God looks at all of us. Each and every one of us sat here in the hedge end site of King's Community Church at the 9:30 meeting. He sees you and he knows you and he calls you by name. In Isaiah 43, God says to his people, I've called you by name, you are mine. What a comfort that is for those of us who know Jesus. That whatever situation we're living in at the moment, whether we're going through the best season ever or the toughest possible circumstances, what a comfort to know that we are seen and known by a God who calls us out by name. He set out a path before us and he holds everything together in his hands. But also that's the truth today for those of you who don't yet know Jesus. If you feel on the margins, if you feel like you're on the outside looking in, or if you feel shunned by the crowd who won't let you in, or if you feel like you're just curious to see something of who this Jesus is, Jesus calls you by name this morning. He knows you and he calls you by name. He knows your history. He knows your story. In fact, everything that's happened in your life up to this point, he knows. He knows everything that we and others might think might disqualify us from knowing him, and yet he still calls us by name. Jesus called out Zacchaeus by name. Do you know the name Zacchaeus literally means pure? So there's irony there, isn't there? Zacchaeus would have known that he was anything but pure. He would have known the sin in his life. He would have known that he was a thief, an extortionist. He would have known that he wasn't liked by others on account of what he was doing and the way he was living. But Jesus reshapes and redefines his very identity. You're no longer who you were, Zacchaeus. You've got a new identity. You are who I always intended you to be. And after Jesus called Zacchaeus by name, what did he say next? He said, I must be a guest in your home today. Now, I'm pretty sure, again, that if we've not met before and I were to come up to you and call you out by name and you're a little bit freaked out, confused, if I were to then declare, I must be a guest in your home for Sunday lunch today, well, that would then probably cross the line into being a little bit rude, a little bit forward, to invite myself into your home, wouldn't it? Because as with a name, to enjoy time together or a meal together in someone's home, it's a personal thing, isn't it? To invite someone into your space, to eat and to talk together. And in the culture that Zacchaeus was living in, even more so, to be invited into the family home was to be invited into the very center of someone's life. And you can see the significance in this through the way that the crowd react. They can't believe that Jesus is going to spend time with Zacchaeus, the sinner, in his home. So why does Jesus do it? Because his heart is always towards those on the margins. He said, didn't he, I came to seek and save those who are lost. Those who the world might look down on. Those who might feel disqualified, unworthy, inadequate. Jesus is inviting himself into the very center of that kind of person's life. In Revelation 3, Jesus says, I stand at the door and I knock. Imagine the door of your home. I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. And where does this encounter end up? Jesus says to Zacchaeus, salvation has come to this home today. Salvation comes for Zacchaeus because Jesus first called him out by name and Zacchaeus invited him in. And in the very same way, salvation can come to your life today because Jesus calls you out by name and all you need to do is invite him in. We can know Jesus because he first loved us and he called us out by name. So Jesus calls us by name. Secondly, Jesus transforms our lives. He transforms our lives. We read together, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I've cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Knowing Jesus means our priorities completely change. In some places, the Bible calls it being born again. You become a new person when you come to know Jesus. You have a new power through the Holy Spirit. You have a new Lord in Jesus. And now you have a new nature in you with new desires. You don't want to keep living the way that you used to. You want to change. You want to be different. You want to be like Jesus. Not so that he will love you, but because he already has. And not so that he might forgive you, but because he already does. And not so that God might be pleased with you and what you've done, but because Jesus has already called you a friend. I know that we could go around this room today and hear story after story after story of how Jesus has completely transformed people's lives. Even just in the last few weeks, I heard a story of someone who's on our current Explore Church course, a story of a guy who grew up in the People's Republic in China as an atheist, no belief in God, and in fact a rejection of any belief in God. And then one day, as a young adult, suddenly out of the blue, he looked at the world around him, looked at how beautifully and intricately the world had been designed, and that begun a journey of discovery towards finding the Creator God, and a journey of salvation, and a journey of complete life transformation from rejection of God to belief in God now as a Christian. It's an amazing story, and there'll be many more like that. Stories of, I used to live like this, and then I found Jesus, and now my life looks like this. In Ezekiel 36, God says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I'll take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. This was the case for Zacchaeus, wasn't it? He was so hard-hearted, and on encountering Jesus, he totally changed. He became tender-hearted. He became compassionate. He wanted to give back what he'd stolen. He wanted to right the wrongs. And why? Why would people want to change when they find Jesus? You might be thinking, actually, my life's doing okay, thank you. I don't really want to change very much. Well, in Matthew, we read that the kingdom of God is like a pearl, so valuable that when you find it, you sell all of your possessions in order to buy this pearl. Jesus is that valuable, that precious, that on truly encountering him and finding out his worth, the response is to be willing to give up everything in pursuit of him. Suddenly, Zacchaeus, without prompting it seems, understands the sinful nature and the sinful way of how he's been living. He understands the corruption in how he's gained his wealth, his money. He understands that to live for Jesus is to truly turn away from an old way of living, to make dramatic changes. He said, didn't he, I will give half of my wealth to the poor. And if I've cheated people on their taxes, I'll give them back 4 times as much. He gives away almost everything he has because money's no longer his God. Jesus is. He gives away half and he restores 4-fold. Let's just do the maths for a moment. Let's imagine he was a millionaire. So he gives away half, gives away £500,000 just like that. And then let's imagine he'd ripped off 100 people, £1,000 each. Well, if you times those together, that's £100,000, which he restores 4-fold, so £400,000. Add that together. He's given away 9/10 of what he had because he had a life-changing encounter with Jesus. Jesus transforms our lives. And just as I finish, I just want to compare this encounter between Zacchaeus and Jesus with another conversation we read about between Jesus and another rich man, another rich, powerful man. In fact, he's called a rich young ruler. The rich young ruler in Luke 18, here is a man who has lots of money, but he ends up far away from the kingdom of God. He's made a god of his possessions, and when Jesus challenges him, he isn't willing to give up his money in pursuit of Jesus. And in response to that, Jesus says in Luke 18:24, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. In other words, money is a big obstacle when it comes to people knowing Jesus because it often becomes an idol. They can't submit it to the kingship of Jesus and put him first. So what we're seeing here a chapter later with this guy Zacchaeus, it's a miracle. It's camel through the eye of a needle stuff. One man, Zacchaeus, realizes that following Jesus is a truly life-changing encounter where our hearts are totally transformed. And as a result of that, our values, our desires, everything that we hold dear changes. And we're told he's filled, as a response, with great excitement and great joy. And on the other hand, we read of the rich young ruler who can't give up his material possessions that he loves, that he's clinging to. And we're told he goes away from Jesus dejected and sad. How are you going to respond to Jesus today? In light of him calling you out by name, inviting you to know him, in light of him calling you to give up everything in your pursuit of him. For Zacchaeus, it was his wealth, his money. For you, it could be something different. What is it that you cling on to, that you put your hope and your security in, that you can be reluctant to let go of? It might be money, it might be success, it might be relationships, it could be any number of things. Whatever it is, Jesus is worth giving up everything for. Jesus said, didn't he? For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. And in that sentence, Jesus is summing up everything that he was about. As he was on his way to Jerusalem to die on the cross for our sins, he declares to Zacchaeus, and he declares to us too today, Jesus came to seek out and save those who are lost. Shall we stand together? We're going to respond in worship. Wonder whether we might just pray together for a moment before we do. Lord, I want to thank you that you call us out by name. Thank you that you look down on this place today and you know each and every one of us by name and you call us out. Thank you, Lord, that you pour out your love and your affection, your acceptance, your mercy and your grace on each and every one of us individually. And Lord, I want to thank you that you are worth giving up everything for in our pursuit of you. Lord, I pray right now, as we respond in worship, would you be working in our hearts? Would you reveal to us what it is that we might need to let go of in pursuit of you? And Jesus, would you take center stage in our lives, in our hearts, and in our worship right now? In Jesus' name, amen.